Welcome everyone to the Conservation Enterprise Learning Group webinar. We are very excited today to have a guest speaker from USAID Peru to talk to us more about the lessons learned from the Forest Alliance, managing communal forests through inclusive and sustainable business within the framework of indigenous economy. I see lots of more people joining right now, so that's great. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Nathan. I just wanted to remind everyone about the theory of change that's connected with conservation enterprises and the multiple steps that we take when we decide to do an enterprise strategic approach in order to get to biodiversity conservation. We inherently make a lot of assumptions along the way. And one of those is, well, of course we can just set up an enterprise. I think we're going to hear a lot about the challenges of working in really threatened environments with indigenous people today, about how do you actually go about creating this enterprise so that, and this is our next big assumption, that benefits are realized by people, and how do you manage and organize an enterprise so that that happens. And then the next assumption that comes around, that people will have attitude or behavior change and actually reduce threats to biodiversity. So these again this is our theory of change and some of the key questions that we want to explore in our learning group. So if we go to the next slide, please. We have two speakers with us today. I'm very pleased to introduce Alvaro Gayur from USAID Peru, who is the AOR for this activity, along with Marioldi Sanchez from ADER. Alvaro has more than 25 years experience in international development and is currently an environmental governance specialist in our regional office in USAID Peru. Marioldi is with ADER and is a forest engineer who specializes in social management and project monitoring and evaluation with ADER and the Forest Alliance Initiative. So over to you, Alvaro, to give us a few words about your experiences with this activity and kind of some framing for us. So over to you, Alvaro.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, that's the slide. And thanks everyone for participating in this webinar. The presentation will follow this format. I will introduce some background information about the context where the Forest Alliance is implemented, and then we get into the general purpose of the Alliance. After this, my colleague Marioldi will start explaining what is the problem we are addressing under the Forest Alliance communal forest management model, the theory of change behind, and within it, what are the main activities and progress of the Forest Alliance. The presentation will finish by highlighting the key elements of the communal forest management model and the main challenges identified after 1 year of the activity implementation. Next slide, please. Just an overview of what does working with Peruvian indigenous community imply. We need to know that there are around 418,000 people settled in more or less 2,700 communities that speak 40 different languages. These communities have been historically and mostly negatively impacted in their livelihoods through extractive economic activities, affecting, of course, their ecosystem in such different ways. The predominant economic activities in these communities are based in agriculture and fishing. Very few businesses, different from the subsistence type ones, are run by indigenous people. And finally, there is an increasing mobilization of indigenous young people to the cities, basically seeking for job opportunities. Next slide. The overall purpose of the Forest Alliance is to support 7 indigenous communities in Ucayali region to conserve and manage their forested lands. The Forest Alliance activity is implemented, I would say, under an innovative model with the private sector through a GDA in which Altelia Mirova Fund, the private sector partner, matches USAID funds in a ratio of 1:1. Altelia Mirova Fund works with AIDER, which is a local NGO based in Ucayali, in conserving communal forests through indigenous people and commercializing the carbon stocks in the market, thus generating profits not only for Altelia Mirova, but for Nibiri, which is a private company owned by the indigenous communities conserving the forests in Ucayali. Nibiri will be introduced afterwards by Marioldi. We think this model is allowing to finance a diversity of indigenous entrepreneurship that include non-forest timber products, sustainable logging for timber production, agroforestry for cocoa production, and commercial forest plantations for timber production. So after this short introduction, I think I will stop here and pass it to Marioldi to continue with the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Alvaro, and good morning, everybody. Okay, so one of the problems that the Forest Alliance aims to address is the socioeconomic exclusion of indigenous peoples. Ensuring economic benefits from forests, sustainable management is an effective way to address deforestation, but the indigenous entrepreneurships that are achieving social and environmental progress are weakly included in value chains. They are economically fragile initiatives, and its revenues does not cover all the costs of sustainable forest management. On the other hand, they are part of business models that, with no cultural pertinence, which means that these models are not adapted to indigenous culture. It is important here to bear in mind that in Amazon indigenous people's relationship with the market economy is not that old than 100 years, unlike other human groups. So here's an important limitation to bear in mind. Also, they have very limited access to funding sources. Conventional financial services such as banks do not offer them solutions. And adding here, they are facing barriers to establish financial partnerships with private sector, mainly because both parts have different perspectives most of the time about economy. So this is the main problem, or one of the main problems that the Forest Alliance aims to address. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows one part of the theory of change of the Forest Alliance, which is related to inclusive and sustainable businesses. Starting from the first box in red on the left, if technical support of Nibiri indigenous conservation enterprise is provided, main enabling conditions will be in place. Then the revenues of the conservation enterprise will increase, and this will enable and reinforce conservation behaviors and deliver economic resources to communities that will allow them to address the major threats to forest conservation, which are land invasions for agriculture and illegal logging, mainly. So this is a summary of this part of our theory of change. And then in the next slide, please, I would like to show the activities that the Forest Alliance is implementing in line with this theory of change, and also a summary of the progress achieved in this first year of implementation. Next slide, please. Okay, now I would like to show you activities regarding the first box of the theory of change, support to Nibiri company. We are training men and women members of the productive committees in the communities, which are part of the Nibiri business organization scheme. The training methodology is learning by doing. As you can see here in the first photo, a woman is learning how to prepare a seedling for plantations. This is an example. We are also providing technical assistance to the committees for the transference of forestry and agroforestry technologies for the development of economic activities with a sustainable business approach, which means that these activities will be economically profitable, environmentally and socially responsible. And also the business orientation will allow the communities to be integrated into production chains. We are also providing technical assistance for forest management, for example, in monitoring of the use of forest resources. You can see here in the third photo in the slide, two members of the forest control committees of Pueblo Nuevo community patrolling inside their communal forest. We are facilitating the elaboration of patrolling plans and design and use of adequate templates also to register findings and among other topics. And finally, we are providing business support to the Nibiri company as the commercial aggregator of the communities for the linkage of these communities with markets and the strategic alliances with value chain stakeholders. In the photo here, the last photo, you can see members of the communities in the small processing plant of Nibiri, showing some of the new wood utility products with FSC certified timber that Nibiri is producing. One activity I would like to highlight here is the implementation of a financial sustainability plan from the first year of the Forest Alliance project with the objective of strengthening Nibiri Indigenous Company as the main financial sustainability mechanism of the community forest management. Next slide, please. Thank you. Regarding enabling conditions in place, the support to Nibiri business is starting to set the three enabling conditions that we think are key for the development of the sustainable forest management and businesses. Strengthening governance for business is the first one, land tenure security, and public funds availability. Let me share with you some examples regarding governance for business. The communities have formalized the productive committees in their communal assemblies, which are the higher level authorities in these communities. And each productive committee has elaborated its own rules and procedures, but fully aligned with the communal governance system for ensuring, for example, an adequate implementation of benefit sharing mechanisms. Therefore, these committees are accountable to their assemblies, but also are able to establish commercial agreements with Nibiri for the economic activities. So there is a clear organization scheme that reduces the possibility of social conflicts in the communities, and at the same time generate greater confidence for private sector and other partners to engage. This is one example of how we are supporting or how this governance for business is starting to be in place in the communities. Another example on land tenure security, I can share with you the communities are in the way to register their updated communal land maps and titles in public records for obtaining the highest level of land ownership formality. But at the same time, they have increased their capacities for controlling their lands to improve patrolling and are solving potential conflicts with neighbors, making borders agreements, and that are being also formally registered. These are two examples on how these enabling conditions are starting to be in place. The next slide, please. Thank you. On economic benefits for conservation, well, these benefits are expected as a result of the improvement of the enabling conditions. By 2024, incomes from economic activities in communities are expected to significantly increase. But during last year, relevant progress have been achieved. I would like to highlight some of these achievements. For example, Nibiri increased its annual sales in more than 300% compared to 2018. The incomes of women artisans have increased as a result of quality improvement and new designs for sustainable and ethical fashion markets. And from the RED mechanism that communities are developing with its partner Alfilia, they are receiving funding for the operation of control and surveillance committees and supplies for forestry and agroforestry activities under a RED Plus agreement between the company and the communities that was facilitated by AIDER. These are some examples on benefits for conservation. And in the next slide, I would like to, well, to highlight that these benefits will reduce the threats to forests, will contribute to conservation behaviors in the communities, and will provide the resources they need for covering the costs of sustainable community forest management. By 2024, the Forest Alliance expects to generate the positive impacts. Some of the positive impacts are shown in this slide, contributing directly to sustainable community forest management as the most effective way to reduce threats to conservation. Some of the impacts you can see here is that by 2024, more than 500 hectares will be under restoration with forest native species. Also improvement on sustainable natural resources management in communities' lands, 300 indigenous families with improved livelihoods, and other benefits from this community forest management that you can see in this, you can read in this slide. The next, please. Okay, so about the communal forest management model that the Forest Alliance is promoting. Building from the theory of change of the Forest Alliance and integrating IDER's experience in community forest management, we have updated and structured a conceptual model for communal forest management. It was proposed by the communities that this model will be represented graphically in a traditional community house, as you can see in the slide. And well, I am sure that, I hope we will have a next opportunity to share with you in detail this model. But today I wanted to share that one of the supporting elements of the model is sustainable and inclusive business, as you can see in the base of the house, and that it takes part of an holistic proposal for communal forest management. As you can see in the house, this proposal is integral, holistic, is very aligned with the view that the indigenous peoples have from forests. And we aim that this model will guide the communities in the pathway to sustainable development. Well, as I mentioned, I will be really happy, my team also, to share with you in other occasion this model in detail. The next, please. And I think this is the last one, about the challenges. Well, first of all, scaling up is one of our major challenges, and to effectively align public and private funds to catalyze inclusive investments in other communities. This is our, I would see, the major challenge the Forest Alliance have. Another one is the integration of the community forest management model into public policies and plans. This is crucial not only for the replication and scale up, but also for the maintenance of the enabling conditions, particularly land tenure security. It's very important that this model is really part of the public policies of the country. The promotion of the indigenous economy and the development of an indigenous business culture are also key challenges, considering that this topic has not been properly addressed by the government so far, and that indigenous organizations are demanding support and guidance in order to include communities in market economies with a rights-based approach on a way that they maintain also their indigenous identity and values. And the last one, well, I could not finish without mentioning the challenges of the current pandemic context for re-engaging with communities and to continue providing them the support they need and are demanding for advancing in forest management as part of their strategies to reduce their vulnerability to this pandemic. These are, in summary, the four main challenges we find related to the CFM model transference and to promoting the inclusive businesses in these communities. Well, I think this is the last one. Well, thank you very much for listening. And well, I'm sorry if I speak to maybe it was a speed. And I'm looking forward for this interaction with you. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Marielde. Oops, sorry for the feedback there. I think you did speak a little bit faster this time than you did in our practice run, but it was equally great. I really admire kind of everything that you all have achieved, and I have lots of questions for you, and we have lots of time. I wanted to point out to our participants, you know, we are using Google Hangouts this time, mainly because I know we're all working from home and dealing with challenging situations given COVID restrictions. And a lot of that leads to bandwidth challenges, and Google Hangouts is actually a lot better than Aid Connect or Adobe Connect. So something that we often use when we're working on Google Hangouts is you can type an exclamation point if you'd like to be recognized, and that gives time for us to mute ourselves and you to unmute yourself, and you can ask the question directly. You can also type a plus and the person's name if you just want to agree with a comment, or type in the @ symbol to type in a comment that you want to link to a previous comment. So please feel free to use the chat box to communicate with us. And then also I would like you all to be able to communicate with Marielde and the team directly. So please just tap in an exclamation point if you'd like to be recognized. Right off the bat, I have one question I wanted to start with. In terms of all the work that you do with Indigenous people, it really hit home with me your comment about the communal house TOC that you built with them. I know I have a question, and Luis Ramos in El Salvador also, I think, would like to hear a little bit more from you on how you got people from all the different Indigenous groups to agree on the consensus of this kind of TOC and how they really adopted it and made it their own. I think that might be a work in progress, but if you could comment a little bit about that, as well as any kind of survey tools that you might be doing with them. Like, do you have an attitude survey, or are you tracking people's attitudes over time? Those are kind of two questions I would have for you.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Well, regarding the model, the CFM model represented in this house, well, first I would like to clarify that this yes, indeed, this is a work in progress, but this is a result of a work that IDER is doing, or an experience of IDER since 2000, the year 2000, with one indigenous group, which is the Shipibo Conibo group. Now the Forest Alliance is working with two indigenous groups. Maybe I did not clarify that. We are working with Shipibo Conibos and with Cacataibos. There are two indigenous groups with different languages, but they have a history in common because they share the same, they are sharing some common locations in Ucayali region, the same basins. So they have an historic interaction, and a proof of that is that the languages are very similar. They have similar words. For example, forest in indigenous language is ni, for both indigenous groups. So, well, but this process and this proposal of representing this model in the House came from the Shipibo Conibo group. And it was a participatory process with more than, at that moment, it was more than 15 communities. And what the Forest Alliance is planning to do now is to build on that initiative. For sure, it is a work in progress, and we are starting in a new validation with the communities that are participating in Forest Alliance now, which are 7 communities, also the Cacataibo communities. So we are continue working with them on this, but of course the Cacataibo communities also agrees, and they find that this is a very interesting and very it's a way to do it that represent them, represent their view of forests. So, well, that's what I can share with you so far about this process of validation of the model. And also regarding the surveys you mentioned, well, actually, there has been, well, as I mentioned, providing technical assistance to these communities for several years, and has information, of course, on community attitudes and behaviors, and how these are evolving as a result of the promotion of sustainable community forest management. We have applied surveys, yes, to some communities to register their perceptions. As well, we have developed some participatory evaluation workshops with them to learn about their perspectives, their current attitudes to forest management, to the threats to forests. But I must say this information is not being measured systematically. And this is a challenge we have indeed. The Forest Alliance has established some indicators that can serve as a proxy to measure this change in attitude. For example, the operation of the surveillance committees, also the number of people with developed capacities. These are indicators we are measuring systematically as part of our MEL plan. But we have established a custom indicator on perceived change in community well-being. And we are in the work of defining the methodology for measurement. So it will be interesting also to know if maybe the audience is some experience on how to address this evaluation and this monitoring of attitudes and behaviors.
Great. No, thank you for that. And I think I know I'll speak only for myself, but I think there are a couple of people on the line, like Judy Boshoven here from Measuring Impact. We would like to follow up on that and talk more with you about how you're tracking this over time. I know that's really one of the huge successes now of community forest and indigenous forest enterprises in Guatemala is their ability to actually prove to the government that conservation is better in community concessions than it is in the rest of the protected area in Guatemala. And a lot of that really relies on that baseline data that they can show. And it's definitely a challenge and takes a lot of hard work to have that kind of data. We have 2 comments that are somewhat linked in the chat box, and I do want to challenge my colleagues to maybe unmute themselves and ask their question or make a comment on it directly. We have James Cushman or Jim Cushman from the Development Credit Authority. I believe you're on this call. I would love to hear from you a little bit on this question too. The question from Scott Lampman is, do you have any challenges, Marielde, with kind of flooding the market with your products, whether that be handicrafts or any of your wood products? I would suspect your certified timber might not be a problem with that, but you might comment on that, Marielde. And then also, and this is where I thought Jim might want to make some comments, is around your challenge about effective alignment of business funds. So I will see if Marielde, if you want to speak first, and then James, Jim, if you could please let me know if you'd like to comment as well. So Marielde.
Yes. Yes, well, regarding the market, we are in constant evaluation of the demand of the market. We are aware this is a sensitive or it's a key issue, and particularly for the indigenous businesses. So one of the, maybe I would start saying that one of the strategies that we are taking into consideration in the model is the productive diversification. So we are convinced that the communities have in their forests several resources and ecosystem services that they can simultaneously use to receive the benefits and achieve sustainability. So historically, we know that the forest sector or the forest products have only uh, prioritized timber. And maybe this is something that for some communities has been frustrating, because not all of them has the potential to connect to a timber business in order to generate the necessary incomes for the management of the forests. So one of the assumptions and the actions that we are working with them, with these communities, is to have different alternatives of economic alternatives in the communities. And this is, of course, the timber use on production, but also, for example, agroforestry, to link them with value chains of some commodities like cocoa, for example, that we know, well, of course, the demand still is high, and particularly for products that can demonstrate the origin, the legal and sustainable origin of the sources. And also we are promoting forest plantations, because we think this is something in a in midterm can provide them with incomes from this timber. Other thing I can say is that we are also a bet here for the communities is to make the differentiation of the products. These communities have FSC certification. Nibiri company has also the certification of the chain of custody. And we think that there are specific markets that continue with a demand that is increasing for products that can really provide transparency and demonstrate that and they are not only sustainable, but also they are contributing to social development in local communities. So I can say this is something that we are addressing now, but for sure the market is something relevant, and that's why also the Forest Alliance has started from the first year with this financial sustainability plan, and we have the opportunity to receive advisory, specialized advisory for these market issues. And well, that's regarding that. And then you, I'm sorry, you mentioned something about the alignment of, okay, I see the questions here in the chat, the effective alignment of business funds. Of funds from, what I meant is the alignment between public funds and private funds. And this is something, well, it's not only our analysis. I think this is something that has been also discussed for a lot of specialists in climate funding, for example, that there is really a need, an urgent need to combine or to find innovative ways to combine public funds from the countries, from the local governments, for example, with investments from private sector. Because we find that, for example, in the local governments, which the communities are set, so they have public funds for example, from the payments from these big extractive companies, you know, that the taxes and other kind of taxes that the local governments received, but they do not prioritize conservation of forest management investments. And we believe that if we work closely with the local governments and show them how their public investment can leverage the private investment, they can really achieve a good impact in the territories. So that's what I meant with the alignment between the public funds and the private funds.
Sure, thank you for that. I think we have another colleague who wanted to see if you could comment a little bit about working with Althelia Climate Fund specifically, and kind of any lessons learned from your work with community-based NGOs making that connection with international private investment funds, really from that local people perspective, because as you said, I think that there might be confusion on their part about all these different options coming and everybody wanting to certify them for red credits, or I'm just kind of like, how do you make that bridge between the local and the international?
Well, I must say that here this is an advantage of having a civil society organization as a facilitator of this process and building these bridges between the local and the international level. I must say this is an appreciation that is not only from us, it comes also from our private sector partners, our international cooperation partners, from the communities. They recognize that because the current conditions they are facing, the accessibility or the access to the cities, to communication, the communities recognize that they need to build these partnerships with organizations that could provide them the support and to facilitate this communication and articulation from the community level with the national and international level. And well, of course, IDER has played an important role in this partnership between Althelia as a climate fund and the communities. This is something also that took more than 1 year. It was a process of participatory consultation, of building together the agreements for the benefit sharing from RED, and also the governance system. And I think, well, it is important to take the time that is necessary to really build this relation under solid, transparent, and in equity, right? In conditions that are in equity. That's what I can say from that. I don't know, maybe Alvaro from the USA point of view could provide some remarks on that.
Yeah, well, I think the relationship with Althelia and IDER, I think it stands for almost a decade. It started in the protected area management in a natural reserve in Tambopata under administration contract with the National Service of Protected Areas, and they demonstrated under a RED scheme that they can actually sustain the management of the protected area for many years, because these administration contracts are provided from the state for at least 10 years of and sometimes for more years. So I think what they did is, I mean, taking this relationship for so many years to establish this almost the same model with indigenous communities in conserving their forests. So I think it's a win-win model. Althelia invests as a risk capital impact fund, and IDER assures the communal forest management implementation, let's say by control and surveillance of the forest management systems, plus the satellite deforestation early warning system. So through this model, the revenues from the carbon stock sales are distributed among the communities and, of course, the investor under specific formal agreements among the communities involved, IDER and Altelia.
Yeah, that's great. And I think there's no doubt a lot of lessons there that we could work at documenting and sharing more broadly, specifically with groups like Althelia. I did see that we have our colleague Netra in Nepal join us. Thanks for joining us, Netra. I'm sure it's quite late for you. You. Thinking about Netra has really spurred this question that we're starting to look at some of the Nepal community enterprises. And we have Judy here, and I think Judy wants to make some comments. So as soon as I ask my question, Judy, I'm going to turn it over to you to also add to it. I think we're really interested in looking at the evolution of your enterprise over time, and how you really have gone from that community-based kind of with the vision toward the local and making those connections as you grow as an organization with the international market. We saw that through the community enterprise or conservation enterprise retrospective that Judy did so much work on. And that really came out from the Nepal example. So I just wanted to turn it over to Marioldi to see if you could talk a little bit about how you have evolved as an organization and kind of what that's meant both for you as an organization, maybe what that's meant for AID as the manager of, how AID management of your activity might have changed over time. Is that kind of what you were going to ask, Judy, or were you on another question? And yes, please turn your audio on.
I had a different question regarding what you raised before, Megan, about monitoring the conservation behaviors, attitudes and conservation behaviors. The more of these case examples that I see for conservation enterprises, I'm finding it more important that teams really tease apart the relationship between the conservation behaviors and threat reduction, and I'm finding this a pattern. And forgive me if you've already mentioned this and I missed it, but so you spoke of community forest management, and that involves restoration and sustainable harvesting of timber and non-timber forest products. And I'm wondering what the explicit relationship is to the threat reductions that you discussed. So I saw ag encroachment to the forest being an issue. So is the assumption that if they do sustainable forestry management, then the same individuals no longer have the need to encroach in the forest because there's income substitution from sustainable forestry management? Or is it because they're motivated to report outsiders who are encroaching on the forest? Or is it because, or in addition, it could be in addition, they become the constituencies generally for policies that that advocate for forest conservation. So I think in order to be able to monitor that assumption, it needs to be defined very explicitly.
So I think those are two questions for you, Marioldi. One around how have you evolved over time, and another over what's that connection with threat reduction?
Yeah, sorry, what's the connection with, I missed the last part of the question, of the second question?
I was just summarizing Judy's question around how are you monitoring, and kind of what are your thoughts behind this? If you increase your the benefits going to the community, how is that changing their behaviors on threats like ag encroachment or excluding outsiders, or do they just become stronger advocates?
Okay. Okay, well, I can share some thoughts on that, and I would also like to mention that here in this webinar is participating Berenice Brizuela, who is responsible of sustainable businesses of the Forest Alliance, and also Sofia Molero, who is the social specialist. So maybe they would like also to highlight something, just for not to be me, the only one
Sure.
sharing with other thoughts. Okay, well, I can start with the first one on the how IDER has evolved as an organization, and how the relationship with the community has also evolved over time. Well, I can start saying that at the beginning, of course, maybe the relationship between communities and IDER was more oriented, or mostly oriented, on the provision of technical assistance and on the transference of new technologies, for example, for sustainable forest management, considering that new context of markets and of the new context of the Amazon landscape was demanding from the communities to adopt new practices and combine these new practices with the traditional ones. But I think during these years, these have evolved to a relation of long-term partnership between IDER and the communities, where the role of IDER goes beyond technical assistance, and in which the communities begin to recognize IDER's role as a facilitator and as a technical advisor more than a provider of technical assistance. It's like a technical advisor, an advisory that continues over time, and also a technical advisory with them recognizing that they are the ones that lead their own social processes and decisions. So they are seen either now in the role of advisory, but they are very conscious that all the decisions and all these the commitments and the actions around sustainable forest management are part of their social communal processes and are part of their path to development. And I must highlight here, for example, the indigenous communities, and this initiative was born from the same indigenous peoples groups. They decided to have this document that is named Plan de Vida, right? This is something that they decided to have, this planning or this planification on how each community will walk to sustainable development. And they are seeing now that the forest management is part of this life plan. This is not something that came from outside. I cannot, I mean, at the beginning, for sure, this was seen like that by a lot of communities. Maybe at the beginning they feel that this was something that comes from outside, it was not something bottom up. It was more that top down, coming these regulations from the forest law, and some requests from the government or for civil society organizations demanding from the communities more efforts for conservation. Maybe at the beginning it was some confusion there, but we really are we can say now that at least these communities that are part of this initiative have embraced the forest management as part of their own development pathway. Regarding the second question, I just want to say that what our rationale, or what we have identified with them, is that the increase of the incomes, while this increase of incomes is being managed under a social organization structure that also raised from the governance system of the communities, this increase of incomes will lead directly to increase capacities of the communities for example, in the case of the threats of invasions, part of these incomes would finance the work of the committees of control and surveillance for continue the patrolling and for the authorities to continue with these processes of bordering and of formalization of the land titles. And this is supposed to be something permanent, meaning that this contribution to indigenous economy or to the community's economy will be managed under this traditional system of governance, and it's expected that part of the incomes will finance these activities. And this is something that has been organized by the communities themselves. I don't know if this kind of answer part, at least, of the question that Yuri had, or the comments. And again, I don't know if Alvaro or maybe Berenice or Sofia would like to add something.
I would appreciate thinking or hearing a little bit from you about the evolution of your organization and even the evolution of your relationship with AID. Has anything really there changed?
Well, yes, I think for sure IDER has learned a lot from this intercultural exchange. Some of how IDER evolved. Well, for example, we recognize that we have integrated new approaches to our initiatives, not only initiatives for native or indigenous communities, but also for initiatives with other groups in the Amazon and even in other parts of the country, in the North Coast, where we are working with drylands communities. We have integrated new approaches as a result of this experience of working directly with these indigenous communities. Also, we learn how to better mainstream indigenous knowledge, for example, to our technical proposals. I think this is something also very important that IDER has started or has enforced or reinforced in the management of the initiatives, enhancing also the interdisciplinary work as a result of the lessons learned and the acknowledgement of the real perspective and needs of these communities. This interdisciplinary work includes, for example, the participation of indigenous professionals in our staff. We have several indigenous men and women professionals working in the Forest Alliance and in IDER. And if I understand correctly, you were also saying about our relationship with USID, right? If something changed?
Correct.
Well, I think we are now in a new stage, new era of collaboration. I can say it from their side, and this is a reflection we just made a couple of weeks ago. We started a relationship with USID on 2000. Well, it was not a direct relation. It was through a regional initiative, the ICA initiative. We were local partners of Rainforest Alliance for an initiative in Madre de Dios in Peru. But after that, we had the opportunity to develop a project named Social Capital for Forest Management on 2014. And at that year started the direct partnership between IDER and USID. And I think from that we have built a lot. We have gained a lot of lessons learned. And now under this GDA initiative, we feel that it's a different alliance, because it's not only for funding the activities, it's for sharing and building together some overall strategies for indigenous peoples. In this case, we see that USID has, for example, they just released the policy for indigenous peoples, and we really feel that a lot of components of this policy are really linked or aligned with our work in Forest Alliance, and we are in constant interaction with these under this component, for example, to see how we can what components of these initiatives we can bring to communities, Also on the area of mail, for example, mail monitoring, evaluation, and learning. In the learning part, we also feel that we are more actively engaged in some of the USAID initiatives globally. We also were part of the pro-land assessment, for example, last year. We think that we feel more engaged in not only because of this project, but also in the overall initiatives of USAID globally. And we feel this is something very important and positive for the management of the project. Yes.
Mm. Great. I think I would like to ask Alvaro if you have any kind of final words, like in 1 minute, and then we just have 1 or 2 more slides at the end. Is there anything kind of from your perspective you'd like to add on any of these?
Yes, thanks, Megan. There is a question from Luis. If we feel these beneficiary groups are now on a path towards their own development and prosperity. And I think if we look at the 7 communities we work with, there are, of course, differences. And there is one that I can say it's a point of reference, like the Calleria community, where you can find things like when you are visiting them, you ask them for the life plans, and you see that they have already updated their life plans, and they use these life plans as a mechanisms to align public funds for their own development. So I think I think that's part of the model as well. The other thing that we are working hard is that, as Marioli said, we have elaborated a sustainability financial plan that is very centered on the Nibiri company. So our approach is to put in value this Nibiri company that will be the first entrepreneur indigenous company in the country. And we are focusing on that. And not only we are trying to integrate, the conservation into development. That's why one of the things that we are doing is work very close to the Alternative Development Office, who works on agroforestry systems, and in some cases we share the same areas. So we want to make conservation as part of the development of other communities that are working for agroforestry systems. And the other thing is that we look forward to this Forest Alliance as a platform where, of course, we start working with Altelia, but we don't want to still work with Altelia only, but we need to put more private sector partners. And we have now, and Marioli knows, a list of many national companies and international also interested in the model. So I think it's part of the sustainability plan and the scaling up plan for the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Alvaro. I don't think you could have said it any better than to say that this is an example of conservation really is development. I think that was perfect. I did ask to advance the slide to our last slide, and just to ask you all to please click on the link above and give us a little bit of feedback about what you thought of this presentation. And also just to highlight to everyone, we do have a learning group website for conservation enterprises where you'll find this recording as well as lots of the previous recordings. And other resources. And thank you, Marioldi, for bringing up the Land Office assessment of community-based forest enterprises. We will share that with the learning group as soon as it's final. I think they're in the very last stage of production. Thank you, Nathan, for putting the link to our learning group website in the chat box. And please do fill out that survey. Let us know what other resources you would find helpful. We really want to keep these webinars most relevant and useful to you. And lastly, a huge thank you to Marioldi and your colleagues and to Alvaro for sharing what you've learned today with us. You can find Marioldi's contact information here on the screen. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions or special requests. I know that time is a very precious resource, and Marioldi, I know you spend a lot of time, and I can't thank you enough for sharing what you've learned, and thank you as well, Alvaro. I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.